Hi, everyone. Sarah Brown-Wessling here from the Council of Chief State School Officers National Teacher of the Year program. I'm excited to introduce Voices from the Classroom, the State Teacher of the Year podcast. I was named National Teacher of the Year in 2010, and since then, I've been committed to sharing the stories and elevating the voices of the State Teachers of the Year. It is my hope that this podcast will give you insight into the incredible work they do. In these episodes, the 2020 State Teachers of the Year are navigating responding to two radical changes in our society, the COVID-19 pandemic and the heightened awareness of institutionalized racism. Through this first series, My First Lesson of the Year, we hope to capture the true essence of the return to school from an educator's perspective. You can join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag #NTOY20 or visiting us online at ntoy.org. That's ntoy.org.
This is Carolyn Fennessy, Press Secretary at the Council of Chief State School Officers. Welcome to Takeru, and thank you for joining me for this conversation today. To start, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Takeru Nagayoshi. I also go by TK. I'm the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, and I teach English and research at New Bedford High School in Southern Massachusetts. Excited to be here today.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Could you tell me about one of your first lessons that you've taught so far this year? I know as we're recording this, you've only been back for a couple days.
Yeah, so to give you a little context for what we're doing, we only have 30-minute lessons every day. And so it's really up to the teachers to decide what kind of work that they want to do. Should it be synchronous or should it be asynchronous? And for me, making sure that there's a really strong communication system and my norms and expectations around work on both synchronous days and asynchronous days is super important. And so I've been really doing a lot of boring stuff just related to making sure that kids are onboarded to what the expectations with engaging looks like. Because, those are things that we need to be explicitly taught. And so making sure that my kids are scaffolded with not just the academic expectations for the year, but also just what it means to come to this space and be ready to learn. I feel like it's been an interesting time to think about what my role as a teacher is and what kind of teacher that I want to be. To give you a bit context, I'm an AP teacher, and so a lot of how I've been evaluated and even celebrated as a Teacher of the Year has been around the academic work that my kids do. But, the coronavirus situation and the difficulty around getting our students to prioritize academic for really valid reasons makes me think of, well, what are the other hats that I really need to be centering right now? And a lot of that is centering around the social emotional supports that I want to be giving. And when I take a step back out of the academic context as an English teacher and think of why do we learn English and why is English something that we present as a curriculum and what are the raw skills? It's things like critical thinking and analyzing, self-reflection, asking questions, putting our thoughts to words in a persuasive and communicative way. And when you think about it, I don't have to use the AP curriculum or analysis of iambic pentameter, for instance, to get my kids to that level. And so I'm really starting to notice that my interaction and engagement with kids have been focused on that interpersonal communication. And one thing that's pretty cool, and it's not a scalable solution, is that, instead of using the classroom and the content that I teach as the main and only vehicle through which I get to those skills that I just mentioned, it really comes down to the magic in between the conversations, the follow-up that I do, the text messages and the calls that I have with the kids afterwards when I notice that they didn't come to a class and when I check in. And so, it's been a really big learning experience and a pivot for me as well. But I also think one that has long-term value and implications for my teaching as a whole.
Definitely. What strategies have you found useful to provide that emotional support to your students when you can't be in the same place?
So I have 120 kids and like widely discrepant like class numbers. So one of my classes, there's about 30 kids. And actually it's really hard to remember their names and faces, especially when they can't put on their cameras. It's also really hard to make the class feel engaging. And it's also hard to make the relationship that I'm building, the rapport that I'm building, not feel transactional. So I've made it a point for every class to have what I call a latch-on question. And, I actually steal a lot of my engagement strategies from YouTubers and streamers. There's this one YouTuber, he's a comedian, and he has this segment where he asks his followers and viewers some random question that anchors the content for the next day. It's called like Yesterday I Asked You, and then he highlights really funny comments the next day. And so I've been sort of inspired by that idea and would ask some kind of latch-on question that would help me associate a random fact with my student. And so I think one of the first days I asked them, like, what's an underwhelming or boring fact about you? And that was also a prompt that I stole for Twitter. And I would ask that like while the kids are coming in on our Zoom session. And so it serves multiple purposes, right? As like attendance, there's this funny engagement piece, but it also, I feel like, allows me to ask questions that in a normal setting wouldn't always find its way in my pedagogy. And it gives me that random thing to like latch onto kids for about. And so like, I'm forever going to remember for whatever reason that Aaliyah's favorite food is the BLT sandwich, and the fact that we connected over that in our follow-up conversation when I noticed that she didn't come to class the next day. And so, you're finding those little ways of making connections as meaningful as it could be has been both a challenge but a joy. Again, I defer back to like stealing a lot of strategies from YouTubers because they have really great ways of engaging with their audience and making them respond to things engaging and sharing and continuing on the dialogue on the platform. And so even something as simple as like cold calling a student, like in class when we call on a student, like you have their attention on you. And so you make eye contact and you say, hey, Carolyn, like, what did you think about X, Y, and Z? But in the Zoom session, like, it's hard to gauge where they're at. They might be distracted. You're not really seeing their face, especially if they don't have their camera on. And so you really need to take the time to kind of make your way there and have to articulate and speak really clearly. And so it might be like calling a shot, let's say, on a cooking show on YouTube, where you're saying, so what I'm going to do now is call on a random person to unmute themselves and summarize what the expectation for blah, blah, blah was. That lucky person is going to be, Carolyn, do you mind blah, 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 right? And so I think being really clear about and intentional about your medium and the fact that traditional ways in which we engage a physical space doesn't translate well. And so looking to other professionals and experts who already do this kind of stuff, and I guess it's no secret that I really love YouTube and watch a lot of YouTubers at this point, has been a way that I've been kind of channeling a different type of teacher persona, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think that it's so popular with your students, I'm assuming, that why would you not, take from what they like when it's useful anyway? Yeah.
There's this like language and engagement method that I think they're more comfortable with. And so even like when I'm having a discussion, and what's cool about, virtual Zoom sessions is that we have the chat, which is also like a meta conversation. And it's hard for me to constantly engage back and forth, but as I'm having a conversation and I know that later on there's going to be a breakout session and then later on I might want to follow up with a student, as I'm talking I might say, and make sure that you drop in the chat function what you thought about XYZ. And again, like that sort of language and way of engaging is directly lifted from the way that streamers and social media influencers talk to their audience. And I think it's kind of intuitive to our kids as well. And so channeling that persona again has been a fun thing, I think.
Great. Is there one particular YouTuber that you are channeling the most, or is it sort of bits and pieces from a couple folks?
Definitely like vloggers. I'm also a huge fan of like video essayists and like gaming streamers. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's so much that we can learn to the extent that we're on this new medium. And I've said it so many times, and I really believe in this, when it comes to the pandemic that we're in, it's a time of a lot of innovation and creativity. And I see this new way of understanding platforms and pushing our craft. And I'm not saying that it's perfect or better in any way, but it's also a new opportunity to explore. And also to like the point of a lot of our Zoom sessions feeling transactional, it's so easy, I think, in a grid where you see 30 faces or 30 names, for a kid to feel as though they're not being engaged, or if they're more introverted or unwilling to engage, to kind of check out and hopefully slide through. And you don't want that to be the case. And so even in a typical lesson, making sure that there are, a couple of chat check-ins or doing that cold call thing that I said. And obviously this is, the first couple of days. And so I'm still exploring what other engagement strategies there are, but making sure that those exist, I think, can make the intimacy and the relationship building feel more authentic. And I gave you that example about the random facts that I ask my students.
Mm-hmm.
I actually save all the chat logs of my kids. And what I do during my prep period is go through all of them, and I send them a message of like, cool, I had no idea that you had 2 dogs. Make sure that you pet them for me. Or which kind of video games do you play? It's really awesome that, you're like an Xbox guy. I'm more of a Nintendo Switch guy. And, the kids are caught off guard, I think, in some cases, because they're like, I thought he was just randomly asking this to fill time, but I'm using it as an intentional way to build that connection so it doesn't feel one directional. And again, there's something that I'm latching onto beyond just a name or an avatar on a screen.
Right. Okay. So for our last question, what throughout this process have you learned about your students or teaching or learning or yourself through this process?
That I think I'm learning that there's so many good ways to be a good teacher. And like as an AP teacher, for better or for worse, and definitely in this context, I guess for more worse, we feel as though the value that we give to our students is academic in nature. But I think I'm really broadening my understanding of even what those academic skills are like. And I had this conversation with a parent, and she was similarly questioning aloud the traditional metrics where we value and recognize students, which has always been through an academic framework. And, to the extent that remote learning makes it difficult to do that, especially in an equitable way, and to the extent that our culture and our country is going through a reckoning around social justice and racial topics, sometimes as a teacher, and especially as an AP teacher, this focus on Shakespearean sonnets, for instance, just doesn't feel as relevant and needed. And when I take a step back and think about, well, what is the purpose of being a good teacher, which is to make good people, compassionate humans. And when I take a step back and think about what's the purpose of English, to make them ask good questions, to make them critical thinkers, to help them put words and thoughts into words, then I can do that outside of academic frameworks, right? And that can happen in those latch-on questions. That can happen in those one-on-one calls and follow-ups that we do later on. And that can happen through the relationship building that I do with my kids. And it's been a very humbling experience and something that I hope to continue growing on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, TK, for sharing that information and those great strategies and your YouTube fandom with all of us. And I hope you have a wonderful year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the first series of Voices from the Classroom, the State Teacher of the Year podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Council of Chief State School Officers National Teacher of the Year program. It's our honor to elevate the voices of educators across the country and provide them with a national platform to amplify their message and advocate on behalf of their students and colleagues. Please share these lessons on social media with the hashtag NTOY20. That's hashtag NTOY20. Let's keep the conversation going.